Hello everyone and welcome to today's video, and in this one I'll be doing something different. So what I intend to do in this video would be to just simulate an interview process. So this is, if I'm to interview a Flutter developer, this would be the type of things I would like to check if the Flutter developer actually knows. I'm not going to be asking you to build me a UI because before the interview I expect you ought to have done some UIs. So this video is just going to be covering some basic scenarios to see if a developer actually understands what happens in a Flutter application. So I'm going to be simulating this with a very simple example today. So I have a very basic Flutter app over here, and you can see it's pretty straightforward. I have the base widget, and I also have the material app, the home widget, and the second screen. So what this simply does is that when I click on this button, it navigates to the second screen and I could come back. So now the first question I would ask would be, having this application set up already, what is the need of providing a separate widget as the assigning a separate widget to the home property? So I'll be asking the developer, why do you have to do something like this? Could you copy this stuff here and put it? Because if you can see, it's pretty much a very simple widget over here. So I'll be asking, why don't you copy this scaffold over here and put it inside here? So I'll tell the developer to actually try that. So for that, I'll just simply do that. So if the developer tells me, for instance, that this is how Flutter is, and he does not give any concrete reason, I'll tell the developer to, since there's no difference in actually copying this over here, I'll tell the developer to actually copy it and see if the app would still work. So I'll come over here and copy the scaffold, and I'll just leave this. I'll leave this previous one, and I'll paste the code over here. So I'll save, and I'll try the app to see if it still works. So I'll hit the second screen and it's not navigating, so there could be something wrong. So I'll open up my debug console, and if you can see over here, the error is stating that navigator operation requested with a context that does not include a navigator. So the next question I'll be asking is, why is this code broken? Why do you have this error? Since initially you told me that there was nothing wrong with with the previous, as in with actually copying this scaffold into this build method over here. So now I'll be looking for, the main idea behind this is just to check if you actually understand what's happening. Because if you create a Flutter app initially, if the counter application has this same pattern, so as a developer you should be curious to know, why is this pattern so? Why can't I just copy this stuff and do this? Would the application be broken if I actually do that? Is there a need for actually doing that? And you can see that from this stuff not working, it means that the previous way that worked had a reason behind why it worked. And you can see now that we copied it over here, the application is broken. So I'll be looking for possible answers. So you can see now the application is broken. So I'll ask the developer, how do you solve this? Why is this error? Why do you have this type of error? So the next thing I would expect the developer to do, if he or she does not know the answer directly, I would head over to the Navigator component and the Navigator widgets, because you can see here, Navigator operation requested with a context that does not include a navigator. So I would head over to the Navigator and see. So you can see here, the navigator operates on the nearest ancestor navigator from a given build context. Be sure to provide a build context below the intended navigator. This line is very important. be sure to provide a build context below the intended navigator, especially in a large build methods and this. So they also made mention here, they said the builder widget can be used to access the build context at a desired location in the widget tree. So before we come to this builder, please, I'll come to this navigator widget, and over here you would see there was a place they made. Okay, they said here, although you can create a navigator directly, it's most common to use the navigator created by a widget app or a material app. Take note of this word, material app widget. You can refer to the navigator with navigator off. They now said here, a material app is the simplest way to set things up. The materials app's home becomes the route of the bottom. So you can see here from our application, this navigator widget we are actually using is the navigator from the material app widget over here. So you can see here, they said here, navigator operation requested with a context that does not include a navigator. So that's the meaning of this is very simple. So previously, the way we actually made use of this navigator.push was inside this home widget. So when inside this home widget, when we did navigator.push and we passed the context, because the way the navigator widget actually works is that the default route is actually the route with the material app. So this home screen is going to be the default route. So now when you say, this context you have over here, with the way Flutter works, this context you have over here refers to the parent, refers to the surrounding, the environment in which this widget was created. So this context over here is referring to what? The parent widget. And if you scroll up here, just imagine if this code was not here, you know we are calling the home widget over here. So the context, this context you're actually accessing is the context of this material app. So the reason why the previous code worked was that when we say navigator.push and we passed the context, we are actually passing the context of the material app, which is the parent, which means that this navigator would work because the parent is a material app. So you are navigating within a material app, because if you can see, this entire UI is a material app and you are navigating inside this material app. So the context is going to be pointing to the correct one. But now, when you come up to this second way we actually did it that gave us that error, we said here navigator.push.context. Now this context we are referring to over here, this context for this builder and also for this push method, the context we are referring to is this context. And with the way Flutter works, this context refers to the parent. Now, if you look now, the parent of this my app is not a material app. So that means you are calling this navigator on an environment that does not have a material app. So if you don't understand, I'll come back again. So what that simply means is that this material app over here is not yet created until we return this function. So from your basic programming, until we return this function, you'd have access to the material app. But here we are trying to make use of the navigator of the material app when we have not yet returned the material app. So that is why you have this error. So if the programmer is giving me all this explanation, I would know that the programmer actually knows how Flutter works and he knows the building block of this framework. So you can see here, you say navigator operation, which is the push operation we're trying to do, requested with a context that does not include a navigator. So you can see here, currently, this context over here from this build method does not include a navigator, because previously when I hovered on the navigator, we said that you can create a navigator from a material app. So now the environment of this my app widget over here does not contain a navigator. Why? Because the navigator we intend using is the one created by from the material app. So this is just how, if the programmer tells me all this stuff, so I'll know, yeah, you actually know what you're doing. So this is how Flutter works. So when you see this build context, this context is actually referring to what? The environment in the widget tree is actually referring to the widget tree. So can you see? You can see the build context, a handle to the location of a widget in a widget tree. So if we have this button, and one thing to note is that every widget in Flutter has a build method. Every widget in Flutter has a corresponding build method, and that build method would have a context, but you don't have to manually pass in the context by yourself. The Flutter framework helps you to create this context and pass this context. So that is, so if the programmer tells me, explains most of these things while he's showing me how to solve the problem, I would know that, yeah, you're a game, you actually know how this works. So now the next thing would be to, okay, so now I would ask the programmer, when the programmer explains to me, okay, that is why we have this error, the next question would be, so how do we solve it? Is it solvable, or must we always follow this pattern that we've been seeing from previous videos? Must we follow this pattern? If the programmer tells me that that's the only way we have to do it, we can't pass a widget directly to home, and we can't access the materials app navigator, then that's a red flag for me. So now to solve this, if the programmer tells me about the builder class, because now if the programmer did not know about this, but the programmer went to the navigator class over here, and because the whole idea is not about getting the question correctly in an interview, it's all about to see how the steps you would take to actually solve the problem. So if the programmer is showing me that, okay, he understands error messages and he knows how to go about it, that's a green flag for me. So you can see here, it said here, be sure to provide a build context below the intended navigator. So over here, this navigator over here, the build context above it is this one, and the build context here does not have access to the material app we are creating. So we need a way to provide a build method before we make this navigator. Must be kind of like a child inside a build context. So the reason why this previous one worked was that this home widget over here, the time we made use of this navigator, you can see we have a build context over here. So when we called home and passed it to the material app, and we now called navigator, this code would work because we have a build context underneath the material app, which is the one returned by this home widget. So now if we head back to the navigator widget, you can see here, be sure to provide a build context below the intended navigator. Cool. That was why the initial code worked. You now said here, especially in large build methods where the nested navigators are created. They now made mention here, the builder widget can also be used to access a build context at a desired location in the widget tree. So what this builder, from this explanation, what the builder, so this is a green flag telling me that builder can actually solve that problem. So you can see here, the builder widget can be used to access a build context at a desired location in the widget tree. So now I want to be able to kind of like create an intermediary build context without actually creating a widget. Because if I create a widget like on line 13, the code is solved, everything would work. But now I want to create an intermediary between this navigator and the material app, because I want to be able to have access to the materials app environment. So whenever I call navigator.push and pass in the context, the code would work. So now we have something here. He made mention of the builder. So if I head over, is it linked? if I head over to the builder widget, you'd be seeing something very funny. The definition of a builder class is so weird and so scary. So a builder is a platonic widget that calls a closure to obtain its widget child, blah blah blah. When we solve this, we'll come back to this. And you guys should also let me know if you like the format of this type of video, or I should you just give me your feedback on this. So you said here, the builder widget can be used to access a build context at a desired location in the widget tree. So with the builder class, I want to create an intermediary between this navigator and the material app. I don't want to actually do this directly. So if the programmer looks at this navigator code and it makes mention of the builder and he tries to create that intermediary, that's a green flag that the programmer actually knows what he or she is doing. So now to do that, I'll quickly... Are you kidding me? Okay. Why is my system slow right now? Okay, so I'm going to wrap with a new widget. So the name of the widget is going to be a builder. And the builder, if I hover here, see the constructor of the builder is going to accept what? An argument called a builder, which is going to be a function that would have a build context inside it. So you should learn how to, if the programmer tells me all this stuff while he's solving it, it means that the programmer knows how to read functions and properties of classes. So over here, I'm going to replace this with a builder. And remember, it's a function that has a build, that takes a build context. So build context. And it returns this. So if this code works, I'll come back and explain it. So if the programmer is taking all this step to solve the problem, then he or she understands how Flutter actually works. So if I click on this right now, second screen, can you see it works? So it navigates to the second screen, and you can see over here, we don't have any error. This line signifies we don't have any error again. So now back to the builder. This is how to actually solve this. So if the programmer takes all the steps to solve it, the meaning of this for me would be the programmer knows how Flutter widgets are being built. That's one. Secondly, the programmer knows how to go through errors and solve a problem. The programmer might not necessarily solve this completely, but if he reads the error and the next thing he or she does is to go to the Navigator widget and checks how this stuff works, then that's a green flag for me. So now, since we've solved this stuff, what is a builder really? So you can see it creates a widget that delegates its build to a callback. So what is a callback? A callback is a function that is an argument to another function or a class. So you can see here this callback. This function over here, this return center, would be called only when this build method executes. So it does not just get called immediately from the name callback. It will be called back when this widget is being built. So now the reason why this actually works is this. I'll explain step by step. So if the programmer is explaining this step by step, that's also a green flag for me. So now you can see navigator.push, and we pass in this context. So previously, this context and this context over here is referred to what? It refers to the context of this build method. And with the way Flutter works, you have to take note of this. The context that is inside the function here is going to be referring to the parent, the environment of this particular widget. So the context that's going to be returned from this widget will be used in the corresponding children. So it's vice versa. It's the opposite way. So back to the explanation. So you have navigator.push over here. This context referred to this context previously, and it gave us an error because the environment of my app does not, as in the outer environment in the widget tree of my app, does not have a material app. And the Navigator widget we are using here is the one that belongs to the material app. So now to solve this, we created an intermediary between what? The material app and the Navigator where we used it. So we wrapped the code inside what? A builder. And the builder does what? Returns a new widget based on the callback. So you can see it here. Creates a widget that delegates its build to a callback. So this function, if you can see, this is a function returning this center and this stuff. So now, after we wrapped it in the builder, the context right now is going to be referring to the context of what? The builder class. So this context and this context here of this Navigator is going to be referring to what? The builder's context. So now, if you've been following what I explained, if you've been following my explanation, this context over here is going to be referring to what? The parent, the environment in which what? This builder was created. So now this context now is going to be referring to the context in which this material app exists. Can you see? So this builder now, this context over here is gotten from this environment here. So that means the builder now goes and now references or takes access to this materials app context. So anywhere we make use of this context inside this builder, it means that we are referring to the environment in which this material app exists. So when I do navigator.push.context, then this code works because you now have access to the materials app. So if you've been following, you should understand what I've been explaining. So that is how to solve this type of problem whenever you encounter them. So with the knowledge of this, if the programmer actually does that, it means that the programmer knows how this Navigator widget works, that most of the time, instead of creating it from scratch, you use the one belonging to the material app. So that was why the code worked the first time. And secondly, also shows me that the programmer knows about the build context and how context works in the widget tree in your Flutter application. So that is how to actually solve this. So that's what a builder does. So if I come over here and I see this statement again, they said what? A builder is a platonic widget that calls a closure to obtain its child widget. So platonic simply means existing in its most simplest form. I think that would be a good explanation. Platonic just means the most basic form of a particular widget that calls a closure to obtain its child widget. So what is a closure? A closure is a function that is inside another function, or a function that is being returned by another function. So you can see here, it calls a closure to obtain its child widget. So where is the closure? The closure is this inner function over here. The closure is this inner function. So when it calls this builder, this closure, it returns what? The child widget. So this is how you use a builder class to actually provide context in between widget trees. So you might be asking, okay, yeah, I solved this. So in a simpler term, you can use a builder class if you don't want to actually create an entire new widgets tree. Oh no, not that. You can use a builder class if you don't want to create an entire new widget. Because why? Every widget has a build method. So this is kind of like having a simple build method inside a widget tree without actually doing what? Creating an entire new widget class. So that's just what a builder, a simpler alternative definition for that. So I could come again. A builder can be used when you don't want to create an entire new widget. Probably you want to have access to a build function, just like the example we did here. The way to actually solve this was to create a new home widget. Well, if you don't want to create a new widget, you could just use a builder. So a builder is kind of like having your own build function with a context inside your widget tree. So that is just when you'd use builder. So the reason I'm doing this type of video is just for us to see how Flutter works and for us to understand. I believe you would learn something from this, because it's cool to always start building using Flutter and using build context, and you don't actually know what this context means. You just have to pass it because you've seen it there and you have to. So with this type of video, I believe that you're just going to be understanding how the inner workings of Flutter is. So now, one more example. So this will be probably the end of this question for the interviewee, but I could also ask the person, like, okay, now you've used builder here, is there any other place you could actually use a builder? So to do that, I think, is it, yeah, okay, let me just copy this over here. So I'll quickly do something over here. I'll quickly remove this. Let me see, center. Let me just wrap this inside a column. Let me wrap this inside a column, and let me create one more button. So I'll say show greeting. So I'd ask, is there any other scenario whereby you could use this builder? So if the person directly tells me, for instance, when you want to call a snack bar on inside a scaffold, you use something like a builder, that's a green flag, that's the correct answer. But I just want to show you guys quickly. So I'll just paste this. So show snack bar, hello world. And let me see. So I'll remove the builder in this scenario, and let me remove the builder. So I'll save this. Okay, let's scroll down. No error. So the first button does what? Navigates, and you know this code won't work since we've removed the builder. The first code navigates to the next screen, and the second one does what? It does what? Show greeting. So when I click on this, I click on show greeting, you can see another error occurs. So you can see here, the following assertion was thrown while handling a gesture, which is the untap unpressed. So you can see scaffold.off called with a context that does not contain a scaffold. So you can see the errors is quite similar with the previous one, whereby I said the navigator was called on a widget that does not have a navigator. So you can see here scaffold.off, and I believe some of you must have used the builder and you don't really know what happened when you when you're making use of scaffold. So you can see scaffold.off. From this, you know this is an inherited widget. So scaffold.off called with a context that does not contain a scaffold. But look at this. Let's track one more time. We have this context, right? So let's track where this context is coming from. So we scroll up to look for a build context, and we can see it's from this my apps build context. And remember, this context is referring to the parent, the outer environment in which this my app widget exists. So that environment does not contain a scaffold. That is why this stuff is complaining. That's one reason. And secondly, look at where the scaffold is, and we are accessing the context from the outer environment. So that is one. Secondly, this scaffold is not yet created until when? Until this function returns, right? So now the same solution for this. We want to be able to access the environment in which this scaffold contains. So what do we do? Builder to the rescue. So I'll just undo, and if we look at this code now, this context is referring to where? Let's scroll up. It is referring to this context. And this context, let's check the outer environment. Does it contain a scaffold? Let's look. Yes, it does. It contains a scaffold. So it's going to be showing you the snack bar in the region of this scaffold here. So that's what the builder widget actually does. So when I click on show greeting, let's wait for this to sync. So I'll click on show greeting and you can see hello world. It actually works. So if the programmer shows me all this type of stuff, then I would know the programmer actually knows what he or she is doing. Because the thing about Flutter is everybody just gets carried away with creating beautiful UIs. Yeah, Flutter is a UI framework. That's cool. But when you're done with the UI, creating only UIs won't get you a job. You have to know how Flutter works and probably how to manage states, increase performance in your app, and also know how to solve problems or how to read all these errors. And I believe this video, I believe you've learned something from this video, and you now know what this build context actually does, and you now know how the builder function works, and you also know that it is not necessary you actually have this format of having this home and delegate it to a widget. If you've just been following the Flutter docs and or example codes online, hook, line, and sinker without being curious, because curiosity is one important attribute of a programmer, without being curious on, okay, why must I do it this way? What about if I pass in this stuff directly? Because in programming, if I return a widget, it's the same thing as actually calling it here directly. But you've learned right now that this stuff, context, build context, is a very integral part in the way widgets are being built. So you can see now that this context is referring to the environment. So if you want to be making use of anything that would have to deal with the material app, which for example is the Navigator or the Scaffold, if you want to make use of this stuff directly inside here, the context is going to be referring to the outer environment, which is over here, the parent. So with Builder, you can be able to like draw in a new layer of context and actually get references to the Scaffold and the materials app methods. So I believe you've learned something new from this video, and if you like the format of this video and how we break down concepts and have a deeper understanding of how Flutter works, then I think you guys should probably give a minimum of 100 likes on this video within the next 48 hours. Then I'll be able to make more stuffs on this. Else I'll know this format did not work and you guys did not learn anything from this. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.